The charcoal smoke drifted across our backyard like a warning I should have heeded. 30 guests mingled on the deck, their laughter mixing with the sizzle of burgers on the grill. I stood there in my polo shirt, spatula in hand, playing the perfect suburban husband while my world prepared to collapse. "Wes, honey, come meet Pierce," Hazel called from across the patio, her voice carrying that artificial sweetness she used when she wanted something. "My gym partner I've been telling you about." I set down the spatula and walked over, wiping my hands on my apron. Pierce Eldrow stood there like he owned the place, all 6 feet of manufactured confidence wrapped in an expensive polo that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. His smile was too wide, his tan too perfect, and his handshake, when it came, squeezed just a little too hard. That territorial grip told me everything I needed to know. "Nice to finally meet the guy from my wife's deleted texts," I said, matching his pressure and holding his gaze. The words hung in the summer air like smoke from the grill. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Someone's sangria glass slipped from nerveless fingers and shattered against the stone patio, the sound sharp as a gunshot in the sudden silence. 30 faces turned toward us, frozen in a tableau of suburban shock. Pierce's confident smile cracked like old paint. Hazel's face drained of color, her carefully applied makeup suddenly looking garish against her pale skin. "What?" Pierce stammered, his voice climbing an octave. "I don't know what you're talking about, man." "Sure you don't." I released his hand and stepped back, crossing my arms. "Just like you don't know about the late-night texts that disappeared from her phone 3 weeks ago." Hazel moved toward me, her heels clicking against the stone. "Wes, you're being ridiculous. Pierce is just a friend from the gym. We work out together, that's all." "Work out," I repeated, savoring the words. "Is that what we're calling it now?" The crowd began to murmur, heads turning back and forth like they were watching a tennis match. Our neighbor Susan stepped closer, her eyes bright with the kind of anticipation that comes from witnessing someone else's drama unfold. Pierce backed toward the gate, his hands raised like I might throw a punch. "Look, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding here. Maybe I should go." "Yeah," I said, my voice carrying across the suddenly quiet backyard. "Maybe you should." He practically ran for his car, a silver BMW that gleamed in the late afternoon sun. The engine roared to life, and he peeled out of our driveway like the hounds of justice were chasing him. Hazel stood there for a moment, looking between me and our guests, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Then she turned and stalked toward the house, her heels striking the patio with sharp, angry clicks. I followed her inside, leaving our guests to whisper and speculate on the deck. The kitchen felt cool after the heat outside, but the temperature between us could have frozen water. "What the hell was that about?" Hazel spun around to face me, her green eyes blazing with fury and something else. Fear, maybe, or guilt. "You tell me," I said, leaning against the kitchen island. "You're the one who's been deleting texts from your phone." "I delete spam messages all the time. That doesn't mean anything." "Pierce Eldrow isn't spam, Hazel, and those weren't spam messages you were sending him at 2 in the morning." She went very still, like a deer caught in headlights. "How do you know about that?" I pulled out my phone and opened the app I'd been dreading to use. "Because I'm a forensic data recovery specialist, remember? It's literally what I do for a living, recovering deleted files, reconstructing digital evidence, finding things people thought they'd erased forever." Her face went from pale to ashen. "You went through my phone?" "I restored your phone 3 weeks ago when you said it was running slow. Funny thing about deleted data, Hazel. It doesn't actually disappear right away, it just gets marked as available space. With the right software, you can recover almost anything." I swiped through the screenshots I'd taken, the evidence I'd been carrying around like a weight in my chest for weeks. "Want to see what I found?" She reached for the phone, but I pulled it back. 237 text messages between you and Pierce over the past 6 months. Want me to read some of them out loud? I've got some real gems here. Wes, please, let me explain. Explain what? How you've been lying to me for months? How you've been sneaking around behind my back? Or maybe you want to explain this one from last Tuesday. I scrolled to a particular message and read it aloud. Can't wait to get away from him. He's so clueless. He'll never figure it out. Hazel sank into one of the kitchen chairs, her head in her hands. It's not what you think. Really? Because it looks pretty clear to me. My wife is having an affair with her gym partner, and they think I'm too stupid to notice. It's not an affair, she said, her voice muffled by her hands. It's more complicated than that. Something in her tone made me pause, not the words themselves, but the way she said them. There was something underneath the guilt and fear, something that sounded almost like calculation. Complicated how? She looked up at me, and for just a moment I saw something in her eyes that chilled me. Not remorse or shame, but the cold assessment of someone weighing their options. Wes, there are things you don't understand. Things about our finances, about the house, about everything we've built together. What kind of things? She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at our guests, who were still clustered on the deck, their voices carrying through the glass. The lake house, your father's property. We need to sell it. The lake house. The cabin on Lake Travis that my father had left me when he passed 2 years ago. The place where I'd spent summers as a kid, where I'd proposed to Hazel, where we'd talked about taking our future children someday. We've discussed this, I said. I'm not selling the lake house. We don't have a choice anymore. What do you mean we don't have a choice? She turned back to me, and I saw tears in her eyes. Real tears, or a good performance. With Hazel, it was sometimes hard to tell the difference. We're in trouble, Wes. Financial trouble. The consulting business isn't bringing in what it used to, and we have debts you don't know about. What debts? Credit cards, loans, things I had to take care of while you were focused on work. I felt the ground shifting under my feet. How much debt? Enough that we need to sell the lake house to cover it. The kitchen felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in. And Pierce? Where does he fit into this? He's a real estate agent. He's been helping me figure out what the property is worth, what we could get for it. A real estate agent. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. That's funny, because his LinkedIn profile says he's a sales manager at a software company. Her face went blank. What? I looked him up, Hazel. After I found the texts, I did what any suspicious husband would do. I researched the guy my wife was talking to. Pierce Eldrow, 34, graduated from UT with a business degree, works for TechFlow Solutions downtown. No real estate license, no property sales experience. The silence stretched between us like a taut wire. Outside, I could hear our guests starting to leave, car doors slamming and engines starting. The party was over in more ways than one. So let me ask you again, I said, my voice quiet and steady. What's really going on here? Hazel opened her mouth to answer, but whatever she was going to say was interrupted by a knock on the front door. We both turned toward the sound, neither of us moving to answer it. The knock came again, more insistent this time. Are you expecting someone? I asked. She shook her head, her eyes wide. I walked to the front door and peered through the peephole. A man in a dark suit stood on our porch, holding a briefcase. Behind him, I could see a black sedan parked at the curb. Wes Farrow? The man asked when I opened the door. Yes. He held up a badge. Agent Morrison, FBI. I'd like to ask you a few questions about your wife. I felt the world tilt on its axis. Behind me, I heard Hazel gasp. What kind of questions? The kind that are better discussed inside, if you don't mind. I stepped back and let him in. Agent Morrison was tall and lean, with graying hair and the kind of steady gaze that had probably made a lot of people confess to things they'd rather keep hidden. Mrs. Farrow, he said, nodding to Hazel. Or should I say, Mrs. Trevin? The name hit me like a physical blow. Trevin, not Pharaoh, not the name she'd taken when we married 3 years ago. I don't understand, I said, looking between them. Agent Morrison set his briefcase on the coffee table and opened it. Mr. Pharaoh, what do you know about your wife's previous marriages? Previous marriages? Hazel was divorced once before we met. Her ex-husband died in a car accident. Which ex-husband would that be? The question hung in the air like smoke. Which ex-husband? There was only one. Agent Morrison pulled out a file and opened it. According to our records, the woman you know as Hazel Pharaoh has been married 6 times in the past 15 years. To our knowledge, none of her previous husbands are deceased. The room started to spin. I sat down heavily on the couch, trying to process what I was hearing. That's impossible. Mr. Pharaoh, are you familiar with the name Pierce Eldrow? He was just here. He's my wife's gym partner. Pierce Eldrow is your wife's first husband. They were married in Nevada in 2008. According to public records, they never divorced. The words hit me like hammer blows. First husband, never divorced. What are you saying? I'm saying your marriage to Hazel Trevin is not legally valid. You can't marry someone who's already married to someone else. I looked at Hazel, who had gone completely white. She was gripping the back of a chair so hard her knuckles were bone pale. Is this true? She didn't answer, but her silence was answer enough. Agent Morrison continued, his voice professional and detached. We've been investigating a marriage fraud ring operating across several states. Your wife and Pierce Eldrow are part of a network that targets successful men, marries them under false pretenses, and systematically drains their assets. Assets, I repeated numbly. Bank accounts, property, business interests. They're very good at what they do, very patient. They typically stay married to their targets for 2 to 5 years before disappearing with everything they can take. I felt like I was watching this happen to someone else. The man sitting on this couch couldn't be me. The woman standing in the kitchen couldn't be the person I'd shared a bed with for 3 years. The lake house, I said, understanding flooding through me. She wants me to sell the lake house. Property transfers are usually the final step, Agent Morrison confirmed. Once they've liquidated the major assets, they disappear. New identities, new targets, same pattern. I stood up, my legs unsteady. How long have you known? We've been watching Pierce Eldrow for 8 months. Your wife came to our attention when we started tracking his associates. 8 months. I turned to Hazel. You've known the FBI was investigating you for 8 months, and you said nothing. She finally found her voice. Wes, I can explain. It's not what you think. Really? Because what I think is that you married me under a false name. You're still married to someone else, and you've been planning to rob me blind for 3 years. It started that way, she said, tears streaming down her face now. But things changed. I fell in love with you. I wanted out of the whole thing. When? What? When did you want out? When did you decide you loved me and wanted to leave this marriage fraud ring behind? She hesitated, and in that hesitation, I had my answer. Agent Morrison closed his file. Mr. Pharaoh, we're going to need you to come in for a formal interview. There are some financial documents we need to review, some questions about your business accounts. Am I in trouble? Not if you've been honest about not knowing your wife's true identity. But we need to document everything. Make sure you haven't been an unwilling participant in money laundering or fraud. I nodded, feeling numb. What happens to her? That depends on how cooperative she is. We're more interested in the people running the operation than the individual participants. Hazel spoke up, her voice small and desperate. I can give you names, addresses, bank account numbers. I kept records of everything. Why? I asked. Why keep records if you were planning to disappear anyway? She looked at me with something that might have been genuine regret. Insurance. In case something like this happened, in case I needed to trade information for a deal. Agent Morrison stood up. Mrs. Trevon, you're going to need to come with me. Am I under arrest? Not yet, but we have a lot to discuss. I watched as my wife, my fake wife, gathered her purse and followed Agent Morrison to the door. She paused at the threshold and looked back at me. Wes, I know you won't believe this, but I really did fall in love with you. Maybe, I said, but you loved my money more. After they left, I sat alone in my kitchen, surrounded by the debris of the party. Broken glass still sparkled on the patio where Hazel had dropped her drink. The grill was still warm, burgers growing cold on the rack. I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through the recovered text messages again, but this time I was looking for something different. Not evidence of an affair, but evidence of the con. And I found it. Messages about bank account numbers, discussions of asset transfers, references to the mark and the timeline, plans to sell the lake house and disappear with the proceeds. But there was something else in the messages, something that Agent Morrison hadn't mentioned. References to my business partner, Brooks Carvin. References to inside information about my consulting firm's finances. I called Brooks, my hands shaking as I dialed. Wes, man, I heard about the party. Are you okay? Brooks, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. Of course. What's going on? How long have you known Hazel? Silence on the other end of the line. Brooks? What do you mean? I mean, how long have you known my wife? Before I introduced you, before we got married. How long? More silence, and then a sigh that told me everything I needed to know. Since college, he said finally. We dated for about 6 months our senior year. The pieces clicked into place with horrible clarity. She recruited you. Wes, it's not what you think. She recruited you to help her steal from me, from our business. Look, can we meet somewhere? This isn't something we should discuss over the phone. No, Brooks. We're going to discuss it right now. How much did you help her steal? Another long pause. It wasn't stealing. It was more like redirecting. Redirecting what? Some of the client payments. Money that was supposed to go into the business account went into accounts that Hazel controlled. I felt the last of my trust crumble. How much? Over the past 2 years? Maybe $200,000. $200,000. Enough to destroy my business, my reputation, my future. Why, Brooks, we've been partners for 5 years. I trusted you. She said you'd never miss it. The business was doing well, bringing in more than enough to cover expenses. She said it was just borrowing, that she'd pay it back. And you believe that? I wanted to believe it. Wes, I've been in love with her since college. When she came back into my life, when she said she needed my help, I couldn't say no. She's been playing both of us. I know that now, but by the time I figured it out, I was in too deep. She had records of everything I'd done. She said if I tried to back out, she'd make sure I went to prison for embezzlement. I hung up the phone and sat in the growing darkness of my kitchen. My wife was a con artist. My business partner was a thief. My marriage was a fraud. My business was built on stolen money. But I was still a forensic data recovery specialist, and if there was one thing I was good at, it was finding evidence that people thought they'd hidden. I opened my laptop and started to work. 3 days after the FBI took Hazel away for questioning, I sat in my home office surrounded by printouts, hard drives, and the digital wreckage of my marriage. The house felt different now, like a stage set after the play had ended. Every piece of furniture, every photograph, every shared memory had been revealed as part of an elaborate performance. The forensic analysis of our financial records painted a picture that made my stomach turn. Shell companies with Hazel's signature, bank accounts I'd never heard of, investment properties purchased with money siphoned from my business over the course of 2 years. She hadn't just been stealing from me. She'd been building a parallel financial empire, using my success as the foundation for her own wealth. My phone buzzed with a text from Agent Morrison. Need to meet. New developments. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop downtown, far from the suburban bubble where my life had imploded. Morrison looked tired when I arrived, his suit wrinkled and his eyes shadowed with the kind of exhaustion that comes from working too many cases with too many victims. "How are you holding up?" he asked as I sat down across from him. "I've been better. What did you want to tell me?" He pulled out a tablet and opened a file. "We've been digging deeper into Hazel's background. The marriage fraud ring is bigger than we initially thought." "How much bigger?" 14 victims across 6 states over the past 10 years. Total estimated losses are approaching $3 million. I felt the number hit me like a physical blow. $3 million. 14 men who had trusted the wrong woman, just like I had. "Where do I fall on that list?" "You're number 12. But here's the thing, Wes. You're also the first one to figure it out before they could complete the con." "What do you mean?" Morrison swiped to a new screen showing a timeline. The typical pattern is 2 to 3 years of marriage, followed by a major asset transfer, usually real estate. Then they disappear. Your lake house was supposed to be that final transfer. But the FBI investigation changed their timeline. Exactly. We think they were planning to accelerate their exit strategy. Sell the lake house, liquidate what they could from your business accounts, and disappear within the next 6 months. The words landed with the dull finality of a closing vault. Morrison's voice was even, practiced, as if he were outlining a quarterly report instead of dismantling the scaffolding of my life. Around us, the coffee shop hummed. Cups clinked, milk hissed, someone laughed too loudly, but it all felt distant, muffled, like sound carried through water. I stared at the timeline, seeing my life reduced to data points and patterns. Boxes, arrows, dates. The first time I'd met Hazel. The slow bleed of money I'd explained away as bad quarters. The barbecue circled in red. My reflection hovered faintly on the laminated surface, distorted by the overhead lights. What happens now? That depends on you. The way he said it made my shoulders tense. Not a threat, not a promise. An opening. What do you mean? Morrison leaned forward. The table creaked softly, and the smell of his coffee, burnt, neglected, mixed with mine. "Hazel is cooperating. She's given us names, account numbers, locations of assets, but Pierce Eldrow is still in the wind." The name tightened something in my chest. I pictured his easy smile, the casual way he'd flipped burgers like he belonged there. "He ran?" "Disappeared the night of your barbecue. We think he's trying to salvage what he can before the whole operation collapses." The image of him slipping away while I'd been handing out beers felt suddenly obscene. "And you want me to help you find him?" "We want you to help us catch him. There's a difference." Morrison explained the plan as I sat there, my coffee growing cold. The surface film thickened, untouched. Pierce would eventually try to access the money he and Hazel had stolen. When he did, they wanted me to be ready. A listening post, a familiar face, bait, without calling it that. "He doesn't know that Hazel told us everything. As far as he's concerned, you're just a suspicious husband who got lucky at a barbecue. He might try to contact you." The thought made my jaw tighten. Why would he contact me? Because there's still money he can't access without Hazel's cooperation. And he might think he can use you to get to her. I thought about it as Morrison waited. He didn't rush me. The idea of helping to catch Pierce appealed to me, but there was something else I needed to know first. Something that had been gnawing at the edges since this all began. "What about Brooks?" Morrison's expression darkened, the first crack in the professional mask. "Your business partner is in a lot of trouble. Embezzlement, money laundering, conspiracy. He's looking at serious prison time unless he cooperates." The words settled heavily. I pictured Brooks' office, the golf trophies, the framed mission statements. "Has he?" "He's trying to. but his cooperation is limited by how much he actually knew about the larger operation. I left the coffee shop with Morrison's business card and a promise to call if Pierce made contact. The afternoon light felt harsher outside, bleaching the familiar streets as I drove home. Stop signs, mailboxes, the same dog barking behind the same fence. But as I drove through the familiar streets of my neighborhood, I found myself thinking about something else entirely: revenge. The FBI wanted justice, which was fine, clean, documented. But justice was a cold, procedural thing. Courtrooms and sentencing guidelines. What I wanted was something more personal, something that acknowledged the intimate damage of betrayal. I wanted Pierce Eldrow to understand what it felt like to have your life destroyed by someone you trusted. Back home, I opened my laptop and started a different kind of investigation. The house was quiet in a way it hadn't been for months, every creak amplified. Not the kind that would hold up in court, but the kind that would give me the leverage I needed. Control, even if only an illusion. Pierce Eldrow had been careful to hide his connection to Hazel, but he hadn't been careful enough. Social media posts archived and forgotten. Credit card records with patterns no one had bothered to look for. Property rentals under shell names that still carried his habits. The digital trail was there if you knew how to look for it. And I was very good at looking. By midnight, I had a complete picture of Pierce's life. My eyes burned from the screen, fingers stiff on the trackpad, his apartment downtown, his gym membership, his favorite restaurants, the coffee shop where he met clients, the bar where he went to watch football games, a map of routines, comfort zones, blind spots. More importantly, I had found something the FBI had missed. Pierce wasn't just Hazel's husband and partner in crime. He was also deeply in debt to some very unpleasant people. Gambling debts, according to the records I'd found. Serious money owed to the kind of people who didn't accept payment plans. The kind who applied pressure in quieter, more permanent ways. Which explained why he was so desperate to complete the con. It wasn't just greed driving him. It was survival. Fear, sharpened into recklessness. I smiled as I closed the laptop. Pierce Eldrow thought he was a predator, but he was really just another victim. And victims, I was learning, were much easier to manipulate than predators. The screen went dark, reflecting my own expression back at me, calm, measured, almost satisfied. The pieces were lining up too neatly to be coincidence. Every move Pierce had made, every mistake, every moment of overconfidence fit into a pattern I recognized all too well. He thought he was improvising. In reality, he was reacting. My phone rang, interrupting my planning. The sudden sound felt too loud in the quiet room. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. Hello? Wes? It's Pierce. I felt my pulse quicken, but I kept my voice steady. The reaction stayed internal, a controlled spike of adrenaline I'd learned long ago how to hide. Pierce, I was wondering when you'd call. There was a brief pause on the line, a breath taken, then released. I could almost see him weighing words, calculating risk. Look, I know what you must think about me, but I need to explain some things. I'm listening. Can we meet? Somewhere private. There are things about Hazel you don't know. The way he said her name, lower, cautious, told me more than his words did. Resentment layered over fear. What kind of things? Things that might change how you feel about all this. I pretended to consider it, glancing at the clock as if I were weighing inconvenience rather than risk. The second hand ticked loudly in the silence. Where do you want to meet? There's a bar on 6th Street, Murphy's Pub. Do you know it? I did know it. A dive bar with dim lighting and loud music. The kind of place where conversations couldn't be overheard or recorded. When? Tonight, 11 o'clock. I looked at the clock. It was already 10:30. I'll be there. Wes? His voice tightened, urgency bleeding through the composure. Come alone. If this is some kind of setup, if you bring the cops, you'll never learn the truth about what Hazel really is. I sat there for a moment, the phone still warm in my hand, listening to the low hum of the refrigerator and my own breathing, weighing my options. I could call Morrison, let the FBI handle it. That would be the smart, safe, legal thing to do. Or I could go to the meeting and see what Pierce was really after. I chose the second option. Murphy's pub was exactly what I'd expected. Dark, smoky, and filled with the kind of people who minded their own business. The air was thick with spilled beer and old cigarettes, music pounding just loud enough to blur conversations into noise. No one looked up when I walked in, which was exactly the point. Pierce was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with his back to the wall. He looked different than he had at the barbecue. Thinner, more nervous. The confident swagger was gone, replaced by the hunted look of a man running out of options. His knee bounced under the table, fingers tight around his glass. "You came," he said as I slid into the booth across from him. "You said you had something to tell me about Hazel." He signaled the bartender for another drink without taking his eyes off me. "What did the FBI tell you about her?" "That she's a con artist, that you're married to her, that our marriage isn't legal." Pierce laughed, but there was no humor in it. The sound was brittle, forced. "They told you the truth, but not the whole truth." "What's the whole truth?" "The whole truth is that Hazel is a lot more dangerous than they think." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, eyes flicking briefly toward the bar before locking back onto mine. "The marriage fraud, the stolen money, that's just the beginning. Hazel doesn't just steal from her husbands, Wes. Sometimes they disappear." I felt a chill run down my spine, cold and immediate. "What are you talking about?" "Husband number 3, Richard Palmer, married to Hazel for 2 years, then vanished without a trace. Police investigated, but they never found a body." "You're saying she eliminated him?" "I'm saying Richard Palmer discovered what she was doing, threatened to expose her, and then disappeared. His car was found at the bottom of a lake in Colorado." The words hung between us, heavy and deliberate. "And you think she's capable of the same thing with me?" Pierce nodded without hesitation. "Especially now that you've blown up her operation. She's in FBI custody, but she won't stay there forever, and when she gets out, she's going to blame you for ruining everything." I sat back, letting the booth creak softly, studying his face as I processed what he was telling me. Fear like that was hard to fake. "Why are you warning me? If you're her partner, shouldn't you be on her side?" "Because I'm not her partner anymore," he said quietly. "I'm her next target." Pierce explained that he'd been trying to get out of the marriage fraud ring for months. The gambling debts were real, but they weren't the whole story. He'd been skimming money from the operation, planning to disappear with enough cash to start over somewhere else. Hazel found out. She gave me an ultimatum: complete the con on you, or she'd turn me over to the people I owe money to. "So you're here because you're scared of your own wife?" "Ex-wife. I filed for divorce last month. Hazel doesn't know yet." That was interesting. If Pierce and Hazel were divorced, it would complicate the FBI's case against both of them. "What do you want from me, Pierce?" "I want to make a deal. You help me recover some of the money Hazel stole from both of us, and I'll help you make sure she never bothers you again." "What kind of help?" Pierce pulled out his phone and showed me a video file. The thumbnail showed Hazel sitting in what looked like a hotel room, talking to someone off camera. "This is from 6 months ago, Hazel talking about her plans for you." He pressed play, and I heard my wife's voice, cold and calculating in a way I'd never heard before. "The husband is perfect," she was saying. "Successful business, inherited property, and completely clueless. We can probably get $500,000 out of him before he figures out what's happening." The voice off camera was Pierce's. "What if he gets suspicious?" "Then we accelerate the timeline, liquidate what we can and disappear. If he becomes a real problem, we handle it the same way we handled Richard Palmer." The video ended, leaving me staring at the blank screen. She was planning to get rid of me. If necessary, yeah. Hazel doesn't leave loose ends. I handed the phone back to Pierce, my mind racing. The video was evidence, but it was also leverage, and right now, I needed leverage more than justice. "What do you want me to do?" Pierce outlined his plan. There were still accounts that Hazel controlled, money that she'd hidden from the FBI. With the right access codes, he could transfer the funds to accounts outside the reach of law enforcement. I'm talking about close to $400,000, money that's rightfully yours anyway. And your cut? Enough to pay off my debts and disappear. After that, you'll never see me again. I pretended to consider it, letting Pierce think he was convincing me to betray the FBI investigation. In reality, I was planning something entirely different. "How do I know you won't just take the money and run?" "Because I need your help to access it." Hazel set up the accounts to require two-factor authentication. I have half the access codes, but she hid the other half. Where? That's what we need to figure out. But I think you might be able to find them. Pierce was right about one thing. If anyone could find Hazel's hidden access codes, it would be me. But I wasn't planning to help him steal the money. I was planning to use those codes to destroy him. "Give me 24 hours, I said. "I'll see what I can find." We shook hands outside the bar, and I watched Pierce drive away in his silver BMW. He thought he was manipulating me, using my anger and desire for revenge to turn me against the FBI. He had no idea that I was 3 steps ahead of him. Back home, I called Agent Morrison. "Pierce made contact," I told him, "and I think I know how to catch him." The next morning, I sat in Agent Morrison's office at the FBI field station, watching him review the video Pierce had shown me. The federal building was all concrete and glass, sterile and imposing in the way government buildings are designed to be. "This changes things," Morrison said, after watching Hazel's confession for the 3rd time. "If she was planning to eliminate you, we're looking at conspiracy to commit murder, not just fraud. Can you use it as evidence? Depends on how Pierce obtained it. If he recorded it without Hazel's knowledge, it might not be admissible in court, but it's definitely useful for our investigation." Morrison paused the video on a frame showing Hazel's face, cold and calculating as she discussed my potential demise. "Tell me about the meeting again. Everything Pierce said, everything he wants you to do." I walked him through Pierce's proposal, the hidden accounts, the access codes he claimed Hazel had concealed. Morrison took notes, occasionally asking for clarification. "He's right about one thing," Morrison said when I finished. "We haven't been able to locate all of Hazel's assets. She's been very careful about hiding money in offshore accounts and shell companies." "So you want me to help him find the access codes?" "We want you to pretend to help him. Let him think you're cooperating while we set up surveillance on his activities." Morrison explained the plan. I would work with Pierce to locate Hazel's hidden assets, but everything we found would be turned over to the FBI. Pierce would be arrested the moment he attempted to access any of the accounts. What about the money he owes to these gambling creditors? That's not our concern. Pierce made his own choices. Now he has to live with the consequences. I left the FBI office with a wire taped to my chest and a renewed sense of purpose. Pierce thought he was using me, but I was about to turn the tables on him in a way that would satisfy both the law and my desire for revenge. The first step was finding Hazel's access codes. Pierce was right that she would have hidden them somewhere, probably in multiple locations as a security measure. But he'd underestimated how well I knew my fake wife's habits. Hazel was obsessive about documentation. She kept records of everything, backed up in multiple formats and stored in various locations. It was a paranoia that served her well in her criminal career, but it also created vulnerabilities if you knew where to look. I started with her computer, running deep forensic scans to recover deleted files and hidden partitions. It took 6 hours, but I found what I was looking for, an encrypted file containing account numbers, passwords, and authentication codes for 17 different financial institutions. 17 accounts. Millions of dollars in stolen assets. I called Pierce from my office, knowing the FBI was monitoring the conversation. "I found something," I told him. "What kind of something?" "Account information, lots of it, but it's encrypted." "Can you break the encryption?" "Maybe, but not over the phone. We need to meet." We arranged to meet at a parking garage downtown, the kind of anonymous location that Pierce probably thought would be secure from FBI surveillance. He had no idea that Agent Morrison's team had been tracking his movements since our first meeting. Pierce was waiting by his BMW when I arrived, nervous energy radiating from him like heat. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, his red eyes and his hands shaking slightly. "Show me what you found," he said without preamble. I handed him a printout of the encrypted file, watching his eyes widen as he scanned the account numbers. "This is it," he breathed. "This is everything she's been hiding." "The encryption is military grade," I told him. "It's going to take time to crack." "How much time?" "Maybe a week, maybe longer." Pierce's face fell. "I don't have a week. The people I owe money to, they're not patient." "Then maybe you should consider turning yourself into the FBI. Protective custody might be better than whatever these creditors have planned for you." "No way. I'm not spending the next 10 years in federal prison." Pierce paced around the parking garage, his desperation growing more obvious by the minute. This was a man who was running out of options, and desperate men made mistakes. "There has to be another way," he said. "Some other source of money we can access quickly." "Like what?" "Your business accounts. The money Brooks helped Hazel steal. Some of that might still be recoverable." I shook my head. "The FBI froze everything. I can't access my own business accounts, let alone any money that was stolen from them." "What about the lake house? You could sell it, give me enough to cover my debts." "And why would I do that?" Pierce stopped pacing and looked at me with something approaching desperation. "Because if I go down, I'm taking you with me." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I have evidence that you knew about Hazel's operation from the beginning. Evidence that you were a willing participant in the marriage fraud." I felt a chill of real fear. "That's not true." "Doesn't matter if it's true. Matters if I can make it look true." Pierce pulled out his phone and showed me another video file. This one showed me at a restaurant with Hazel, taken months ago with a telephoto lens. The audio was unclear, but it looked like we were discussing something serious. "I've got hours of surveillance footage," Pierce said. "Meetings between you and Hazel where it looks like you're planning something. With the right editing, the right context, I can make it look like you were in on the whole thing from the beginning. The FBI won't believe that. Maybe not. But it'll be enough to cast doubt on your testimony. Enough to make them question whether you're really a victim or just another criminal trying to cut a deal." I stared at Pierce, understanding finally dawning. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about survival, and Pierce was willing to destroy anyone who stood between him and escape. "What do you want?" "I want you to mortgage the lake house. Get me $200,000 and I'll disappear forever. You'll never see me again, and all the evidence I have against you disappears with me." "And if I refuse?" "Then I go to the FBI with evidence that you've been lying to them from the beginning. I tell them you were Hazel's partner, not her victim. I make sure you go down with us." Pierce thought he had me cornered, but he'd made a crucial mistake. He'd revealed his hand too early, shown me exactly what kind of evidence he had and how he planned to use it. More importantly, he'd done it all while wearing the wire the FBI had given me. "I need time to think about this," I said. "You have 24 hours. After that, I start making phone calls." Pierce drove away, leaving me standing in the parking garage with the weight of his threat hanging over me. But instead of fear, I felt something else. I felt the satisfaction of knowing that Pierce Eldrow had just confessed to extortion and conspiracy on a recording that would put him away for a very long time. I drove to the FBI office and handed over the wire, along with the encrypted file I'd recovered from Hazel's computer. Agent Morrison listened to the recording twice, his expression growing darker each time. Extortion, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, he said when the recording ended. Pierce just added about 10 years to his potential sentence. What happens now? Now we arrest him, but first we're going to let him think his plan is working. Morrison outlined the final phase of the operation. I would pretend to agree to Pierce's demands, arranged to meet him with the money he wanted. When he showed up to collect his extortion payment, the FBI would be waiting. What about his threat to frame me? The surveillance footage he showed you is worthless without context, and now that we have him on tape admitting it's fabricated evidence, it actually works in our favor. I left the FBI office feeling lighter than I had in days. Pierce thought he was manipulating me, but he was walking straight into a trap. And unlike the trap he and Hazel had set for me, this one would actually work. The next evening, I called Pierce and told him I'd decided to cooperate. Smart choice, he said. Do you have the money? I'm working on it. The mortgage company needs a few more days to process the application. I told you, I don't have a few more days. Then maybe we can work out an interim solution. I've got about $50,000 in cash from my personal accounts. It's not what you want, but it might buy you some time with your creditors. There was a long pause. Where would we meet? The lake house. It's private. No chance of being overheard. When? Tomorrow night. 8 o'clock. Pierce agreed, probably thinking that the remote location would give him an advantage if things went wrong. He had no idea that FBI agents would be positioned around the property hours before he arrived. I spent the next day preparing for the confrontation, going over the plan with Agent Morrison's team. The lake house was perfect for their purposes. Isolated, with multiple escape routes they could monitor, and far enough from civilization that Pierce wouldn't be able to call for help if he realized he was walking into a trap. As the sun set over Lake Travis, I sat on the deck of my father's cabin and waited for Pierce to arrive. The FBI agents were hidden in the woods around the property, their presence undetectable but reassuring. At exactly 8 o'clock, I heard the sound of Pierce's BMW coming up the gravel driveway. The final act was about to begin. Pierce looked nervous as he walked up to the cabin, his eyes scanning the tree line like he expected trouble. He was carrying a briefcase, probably containing the fabricated evidence he'd threatened me with. You came alone? He asked as he climbed the steps to the deck. Just like you asked. Where's the money? I gestured toward the cabin. Inside. In the safe. Pierce followed me into the main room, his tension obvious in every movement. The cabin was dark except for a single lamp, creating the kind of dramatic lighting that seemed appropriate for the end of a long con. Before I give you the money, I said, I want to see this evidence you claim to have against me. Pierce set his briefcase on the coffee table and opened it. Inside were printouts of surveillance photos, transcripts of phone calls, and what looked like financial documents. This shows you meeting with Hazel at least a dozen times before you claim you discovered her affair, he said, spreading the papers across the table. Phone records showing calls between you two that you never mentioned to the FBI, bank transfers that suggest you were moving money to help her hide assets. I picked up one of the photos, studying it carefully. It showed me and Hazel at a restaurant, but the timestamp was wrong. The dinner Pierce was claiming happened 6 months ago had actually taken place 2 weeks after our marriage. This is all fabricated, I said. Prove it. I don't have to prove it. You just confessed to creating false evidence. Pierce's face went blank. What are you talking about? I pulled out my phone and played back the recording from our meeting in the parking garage. Pierce's voice filled the cabin, clearly admitting that the evidence was fake. You've been wearing a wire, Pierce said, his voice barely above a whisper. For the past 3 days. Every conversation we've had, every threat you've made, every crime you've confessed to. It's all been recorded. Pierce lunged for his briefcase, probably going for a weapon, but he never made it. FBI agents burst through the front door and the back door simultaneously, their guns drawn and their voices shouting commands. "Federal agents! Get on the ground!" Pierce froze, his hands halfway to the briefcase, his face a mask of shock and defeat. "Pierce Eldrow, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, extortion, and obstruction of justice." As the agents cuffed Pierce and read him his rights, I felt a satisfaction that went deeper than simple revenge. This man had tried to destroy my life, had threatened to frame me for crimes I didn't commit, had been part of a conspiracy that had stolen from 14 different victims over 10 years. Now he was going to pay for all of it. Agent Morrison appeared at my elbow as his team led Pierce away. "How does it feel?" he asked. "Like justice," I said, watching the taillights of the FBI vehicle disappear into the darkness. But even as I said it, I knew that Pierce's arrest was only half the story. Hazel was still in federal custody, still cooperating with the investigation, still planning whatever move would come next. And I had a feeling that the woman who had been my wife for 3 years wasn't going to go quietly into federal prison. The game was far from over. 2 months after Pierce's arrest, I sat in a federal courtroom watching my fake wife testify against her former partners in crime. Hazel looked different in her orange jumpsuit, smaller somehow, stripped of the designer clothes and careful makeup that had been part of her disguise. But her voice was the same. Cold, calculating, and completely without remorse. "The operation was Pierce's idea," she was telling the prosecutor. "He recruited me when I was young and desperate. I didn't want to hurt anyone, but he threatened me, controlled me." I almost laughed out loud. Even now, facing decades in federal prison, Hazel was running another con, playing the victim, trying to minimize her role in a conspiracy that had destroyed 14 lives. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Janet Reeves, wasn't buying it. "Mrs. Trevin, you've testified that Mr. Eldrow forced you to participate in this marriage fraud scheme. But isn't it true that you were the one who selected the targets?" "I don't know what you mean. You researched potential victims, didn't you? You identified men with significant assets who would be vulnerable to your particular type of manipulation." Hazel shifted in her seat, her composure cracking slightly. "Pierce made those decisions." "Really? Then explain this." Prosecutor Reeves held up a document that I recognized as one of the files I'd recovered from Hazel's computer. It was a detailed profile of a man named David Chen, complete with financial records, psychological assessments, and what looked like a timeline for a con operation. The paper seemed to glow under the courtroom lights, a mundane object transformed into something lethal. I remembered opening that file late one night, the slow dread creeping in as I realized how methodical she'd been. Seeing it now, enlarged and undeniable, felt like watching a private nightmare projected for public consumption. "This document was found on your personal computer, Mrs. Trevon. It's written in your handwriting, and it's dated 3 weeks before you claim to have first met Mr. Eldrow." The courtroom was silent as Hazel stared at the document, her carefully constructed story falling apart in real time. Her posture stiffened, shoulders drawn back as if willpower alone might hold the moment together. Her eyes flicked briefly toward the jury, then back to the page, as though hoping it might somehow contradict the words being spoken aloud. "I don't remember writing that." Her voice sounded thinner than it had earlier, the confidence leached out of it. "You don't remember creating a 40-page psychological profile of a man you later married and defrauded of $600,000? "Objection," called Hazel's defense attorney, a tired-looking public defender who'd been assigned to what was clearly an unwinnable case. "Sustained," said the judge, but the damage was done. The jury had seen Hazel's facade crack, had glimpsed the calculating predator underneath. I watched from the gallery as the prosecution methodically destroyed every lie Hazel had told about her role in the conspiracy. There was no drama in it, no raised voices, just a steady accumulation of facts, financial records showing she'd controlled the operation's bank accounts, emails proving she'd recruited other participants, testimony from previous victims describing how she'd manipulated them with the same techniques she'd used on me. Each exhibit tightened the net. Each witness erased another possible excuse. Hazel sat rigidly at the defense table, hands clasped too tightly, eyes fixed straight ahead as though refusing to look at the wreckage behind her. By the time Prosecutor Reeves finished her cross-examination, Hazel looked like what she really was, a career criminal who'd finally run out of victims to blame. During a recess, Agent Morrison found me in the hallway outside the courtroom. The corridor smelled faintly of disinfectant and old paper. Voices echoed off marble walls, lawyers murmuring into phones, deputies standing watch with practiced indifference. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "Better than I expected. It's strange, watching someone you thought you knew turn out to be a complete stranger. That's what makes these cases so difficult. The victims aren't just losing money, they're losing their sense of reality." Morrison was right. The financial damage from Hazel's con was significant, but it wasn't the worst part. The worst part was learning that 3 years of my life had been based on a lie. Memories rearranged themselves in my mind. Moments once warm, now hollowed out. Every smile and promise stripped of sincerity. "What's the latest on Pierce?" "He's cooperating now. Gave up the locations of assets hidden in the Cayman Islands, Switzerland, and about 6 other countries. We're working with international law enforcement to recover what we can." "How much are we talking about?" "Close to $8 million, stolen from victims over the past 15 years. $8 million. Enough to destroy dozens of lives, to shatter families and ruin futures. Will the victims get their money back?" Morrison's expression was grim. "Some of it. Maybe half, if we're lucky. A lot of the money has been spent or hidden too well to recover." I nodded, understanding that justice in cases like this was always incomplete. The criminals might go to prison, but the damage they'd caused would linger for years, etched into credit reports, broken marriages, and quiet shame. "There's something else," Morrison said. "Something you should know before the trial ends." "What?" "Hazel has been asking to speak with you." I felt my stomach clench. The idea of another conversation with her stirred a mix of anger and weary dread. "Why?" "She claims she has information about your business partner that might help your civil case against him." Brooks Carvin was facing his own legal troubles, both criminal charges for embezzlement and a civil lawsuit I'd filed to recover the money he'd helped steal from our business. The civil case was complicated by the fact that Brooks had spent most of the stolen money, leaving him essentially judgment-proof. "What kind of information?" "She won't say. She'll only talk to you directly." I thought about it as Morrison waited. Part of me wanted nothing more to do with Hazel, wanted to let her disappear into the federal prison system and never think about her again. But another part of me was curious. What could she possibly have to tell me that would matter now? "Where would this meeting take place?" "Federal Detention Center. Supervised visit, everything recorded." "And you think I should do it?" Morrison shrugged. "That's up to you. But if she really does have information that could help you recover more of your stolen assets, it might be worth hearing what she has to say." I agreed to the meeting, more out of curiosity than any real hope that Hazel could help me. 2 days later, I sat in a sterile conference room at the Federal Detention Center, waiting for them to bring her in. When Hazel entered the room, I was struck again by how different she looked. Gone was the polished, confident woman who'd charmed me at a charity fundraiser 3 years ago. In her place was someone who looked tired, defeated, and older than her 32 years. "Thank you for coming," she said as she sat down across from me. "Agent Morrison said you had information about Brooks." "I do. But first, I want to apologize." I leaned back in my chair, studying her face. "For which part? The fake marriage, the stolen money, or the plan to have me eliminated if I became inconvenient?" She flinched at that last part. "You heard about that." Pierce showed me the video. You discussing my potential demise like you were planning a vacation. That wasn't real, Wes. I would never have actually hurt you. Really? What about Richard Palmer? Her face went white. What about him? Pierce told me Palmer disappeared after he figured out what you were doing. Car found at the bottom of a lake. Richard Palmer left town with his secretary. He's living in Costa Rica, running a charter fishing business. Can you prove that? Hazel reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. His address in San Jose, phone number, email address. You can contact him yourself if you want. I took the paper, stunned. If Richard Palmer was alive and living in Costa Rica, it meant Hazel wasn't responsible for anyone's death, just a thief and a con artist. Why should I believe you? Because I'm already facing 25 years in federal prison. Lying to you now wouldn't change anything. She had a point. With the evidence against her, Hazel was looking at the rest of her life behind bars. There wasn't much reason for her to keep lying. Tell me about Brooks. Hazel's expression hardened. Brooks Carvin is a lot more than just your business partner who got seduced into helping us steal money. What do you mean? I mean Brooks was running his own operation on the side, using your business as a front for money laundering. I felt the familiar sensation of the ground shifting beneath my feet. Money laundering for who? Drug dealers? Human traffickers? Anyone who needed to clean large amounts of cash quickly. Hazel explained that Brooks had been using our consulting firm's accounts to process payments for criminal enterprises across Texas and Louisiana. The money I thought was coming from legitimate clients was actually proceeds from drug sales, human trafficking, and other federal crimes. The words landed with a dull, hollow weight, like something heavy dropped into deep water. For a moment, I couldn't connect them to anything real. Numbers on spreadsheets, invoices I'd approved without a second thought, meetings I'd sat through nodding along. All of it twisted suddenly into something grotesque, contaminated retroactively. How long has this been going on? At least 5 years, probably longer. 5 years. Our entire partnership had been built on criminal money, and I'd had no idea. I stared at the table between us, its scratched laminate surface suddenly fascinating, grounding. My hands were flat against it, fingers splayed, as if I needed the pressure to stay upright. Why are you telling me this? Because Brooks set me up. He's the one who told the FBI about our operation. What? The word came out sharper than I intended. Hazel didn't flinch. Brooks found out that Pierce and I were planning to steal money from your business accounts. Instead of trying to stop us, he decided to use us as a distraction. The logic unfolded with sickening clarity. A sacrifice play. Let smaller crimes burn bright enough to draw attention, while the real operation slipped into the background. Hazel reached into her other pocket and pulled out a small digital recorder. This is a conversation between Brooks and an FBI agent, recorded 6 months ago. She pressed play, and I heard Brooks's voice, clear and unmistakable. I can give you a marriage fraud ring, he was saying. Multiple victims, millions in stolen assets, but I need immunity for my cooperation. The sound of his voice, smooth, confident, familiar, sent a jolt through me. I'd heard that same tone in boardrooms, on conference calls, assuring clients everything was under control. The FBI agent's response was cautious. What kind of immunity? Complete immunity, for everything, including activities related to my business partnerships. My business partnerships. Brooks had been planning to throw Hazel and Pierce to the FBI while protecting himself from prosecution for the money laundering operation. The recording clicked off, leaving the room unnaturally quiet. I could hear the distant buzz of fluorescent lights, the muted echo of footsteps in the corridor outside. How did you get this recording? Pierce was suspicious of Brooks from the beginning. He bugged Brooks's office, recorded dozens of conversations over the past year. And you're giving this to me because? Because Brooks played all of us. He used our marriage fraud to distract the FBI from his money laundering. He let us steal from you while he was stealing even more. I sat back, the chair creaking softly beneath my weight, trying to process what I was hearing. Brooks hadn't been seduced into helping Hazel steal from me. He'd been using her operation as cover for his own crimes. What do you want in return for this information? Nothing. I'm going to prison for a long time, and I deserve it. But Brooks doesn't deserve to walk away clean while the rest of us pay for his crimes. There was no self-pity in her voice, no plea, just a flat statement of fact that was somehow more unsettling than any excuse. I looked at Hazel, trying to read her expression. Was this another con? Another manipulation designed to serve her own purposes? Or was she finally telling the truth? Why should I believe you now, after everything you've lied about? Because you can verify everything I've told you. Contact Richard Palmer in Costa Rica. Check the financial records Pierce recorded. Investigate Brooks's client list. She didn't hesitate. The answer came too easily, too cleanly. She was right. Everything she'd told me could be independently verified. There's one more thing, Hazel said as the guard signaled that our time was almost up. Brooks has been moving money out of the country for the past 6 months. If you don't act quickly, he's going to disappear with everything he's stolen. How much money are we talking about? Close to $15 million. $15 million. Enough for Brooks to disappear forever, to start a new life in a country without extradition treaties. Where is he moving it to? Offshore accounts in the Cook Islands, but the transfers aren't complete yet. If you move fast, you might be able to stop them. The guard was at the door now, keys jangling softly as he shifted his weight, the moment closing in around us. Why are you really telling me this? I asked as she stood up. She paused at the door and looked back at me. Because for 3 years, I pretended to love you while I was stealing from you. But somewhere along the way, the pretending became real. The admission hung in the air, fragile and useless. And you think this makes up for what you did? No, nothing can make up for what I did, but maybe it can prevent Brooks from getting away with what he did. After Hazel was led away, I sat alone in the conference room with the digital recorder and the piece of paper containing Richard Palmer's contact information. The room felt smaller without her, the silence heavier. I turned the recorder over once in my hands, then set it down carefully, as if it might explode if mishandled. I had a choice to make. I could ignore what Hazel had told me, let the legal system handle Brooks through the existing criminal and civil cases, or I could use the information she'd given me to expose Brooks's money laundering operation and recover the millions he'd stolen. I pulled out my phone and called Agent Morrison. I need to see you, I said when he answered, and bring someone from the Financial Crimes Unit. What's this about? Brooks Carvin, and about $15 million he's been stealing while we were focused on marriage fraud. There was a long pause. I'll be there in 20 minutes. As I waited for Morrison to arrive, I thought about the strange turn my life had taken. 6 months ago, I'd been a successful consultant with a beautiful wife and a promising future. Now I was sitting in a federal detention center, planning to expose my business partner's money laundering operation based on information provided by my con artist fake wife. But for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt like I was finally getting ahead of the people who'd been manipulating me. Brooks Carvin thought he was smart, thought he could use everyone else's crimes to cover his own. He was about to learn how wrong he was. 3 weeks later, I stood in the conference room of the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, watching agents execute search warrants on every property associated with Brooks Carvin and his money laundering operation. On the wall-mounted screens, I could see live feeds from his house, his office, and 3 storage units he'd rented under false names. Agent Morrison stood beside me, coordinating the raids through his headset. Team 3, what's your status at the storage facility? We've got boxes of financial records, multiple hard drives, and what looks like about $2 million in cash. Team 1, status at the residence. Subject is in custody. Found him trying to delete files from his computer. I felt a grim satisfaction watching Brooks being led away in handcuffs. For 5 years, he'd been using our business partnership as a front for criminal activity, and I'd been completely oblivious. "How much do you think you'll recover?" I asked Morrison. "Hard to say until we finish the forensic accounting, but preliminary estimates suggest we're looking at close to $20 million in assets." $20 million. Far more than even Hazel had suspected. The investigation that followed Brooks's arrest revealed the scope of his operation. Our consulting firm had been processing payments for drug cartels, human trafficking rings, and arms dealers across the southwestern United States. Money would come in disguised as payments for legitimate consulting services, then be transferred through a network of shell companies before ending up in offshore accounts. Brooks had been taking a percentage of every transaction, building his own fortune while putting me at risk of federal prosecution for crimes I knew nothing about. The irony wasn't lost on me. While I'd been focused on Hazel's relatively small-scale marriage fraud, Brooks had been running a multi-million-dollar money laundering operation right under my nose. "There's something else," Morrison said, pulling me aside as his team continued monitoring the raids. "Something we found in Brooks's files that you need to know about." He handed me a folder containing what looked like surveillance photos and financial records. "Brooks has been planning to frame you for the money laundering operation." I opened the folder and found dozens of documents with my forged signature, bank records showing transfers I'd never authorized, and photographs that had been doctored to show me meeting with known criminals. "He was going to claim that you were the mastermind behind the whole operation," Morrison explained, "that he was just following your orders." The evidence was sophisticated, professional quality forgeries that might have been convincing if the FBI hadn't known to look for them. When was he planning to use this? According to his computer files, he was going to turn over the fabricated evidence as soon as he finished transferring his assets offshore. "Make it look like you were trying to flee the country with stolen money." I stared at the forged documents, understanding how close I'd come to spending the rest of my life in federal prison for crimes I hadn't committed. The papers were laid out neatly across the conference table, their edges aligned with meticulous care, as if order itself might disguise the damage they represented. The ink looked ordinary, the letterhead convincing, the signatures practiced enough to pass a casual glance. It was the banality of it that unsettled me most, how something so devastating could look so routine. My name appeared again and again, paired with decisions I'd never made, transfers I'd never authorized. Each page felt like a narrow escape, a door I'd nearly walked through without knowing it was locking behind me. "How did you know to look for this?" My voice sounded steadier than I felt, though my fingers still rested flat on the table as if anchoring me there. "Hazel warned us. Said Brooks had a history of framing his partners when operations went bad." The answer carried no triumph, just a factual weight. I let it sink in slowly, the irony sharp and unavoidable. Even from her jail cell, my fake wife was still providing information that protected me from the people who'd been manipulating both of us. That realization sat uncomfortably in my chest. I didn't know whether to be grateful or resentful, only that the lines between victim and accomplice had never been as clean as I'd once believed. The trials that followed were a media sensation. The marriage fraud case had already attracted attention, but the revelation of a $20 million money laundering operation turned it into a national story. Cameras clustered on courthouse steps, headlines recycled my name with careless familiarity, and strangers debated my guilt or innocence as if it were a thought exercise. I learned to keep my eyes forward, to move through metal detectors and security lines without reacting to the murmurs. The process was slow, grinding, and utterly indifferent to how exposed it made me feel. Brooks tried to claim that I'd been the real mastermind, but the FBI's forensic analysis of his computers showed that the evidence against me had been fabricated. His own files contained step-by-step instructions for creating the forged documents. Watching that revelation unfold in court was surreal. The calm precision with which the agents explained his methods left no room for doubt. Brooks sat rigid at the defense table, his confidence eroding in increments too small to notice unless you were looking for them. I was. Hazel pled guilty to conspiracy and fraud charges, receiving a sentence of 18 years in federal prison. Pierce got 25 years after refusing to cooperate with the investigation into Brooks's money laundering operation. I didn't look at them when the sentences were read. Hearing the numbers was enough. Each year represented a finality I didn't need to witness firsthand. Brooks himself was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge called his crimes a betrayal of trust that endangered national security and corrupted the financial system. The words echoed through the courtroom, formal and severe, and for the first time I felt something close to closure. Not satisfaction, but a sense that the narrative had finally aligned with the truth. But the real victory wasn't the prison sentences, it was the asset recovery. Money couldn't restore the months of uncertainty or the damage to my sense of safety. But it did something else. It acknowledged the harm in tangible terms. The FBI's investigation ultimately recovered $32 million in assets stolen by Brooks over the course of 8 years. After legal fees and administrative costs, I received $14 million in compensation for the use of my business as a money laundering front. $14 million. More money than I'd ever dreamed of having. The number felt abstract at first, almost fictional, until I saw it in writing, attached to my name, free of asterisks and contingencies. I used part of it to compensate the other victims of Hazel's marriage fraud scheme. Men like David Chen and Richard Palmer, who'd lost their life savings to a woman they'd trusted with their hearts. Some conversations were brief, others halting and raw. There were no speeches, no absolution offered or expected, just acknowledgments, quiet transfers, and a shared understanding that damage didn't disappear just because justice had been served. The rest went into a trust fund dedicated to helping victims of financial crimes. White-collar criminals like Hazel, Pierce, and Brooks destroyed lives with the same ruthlessness as violent criminals, but their victims often received less support and sympathy. It felt like the closest thing to balance I could offer, a way to turn something poisoned into something that might prevent future harm. 6 months after the trials ended, I sat on the deck of my father's lake house, watching the sun set over Lake Travis. The property that Hazel had tried to steal from me had become my refuge, the place where I'd finally found peace after the chaos of the past year. The air was warm but forgiving, carrying the smell of water and old wood. The day slipped away without urgency, colors softening as the light lowered. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Mr. Farrow, this is Richard Palmer. I understand I have you to thank for helping to bring Hazel Trevon to justice. If you're ever in Costa Rica, I'd like to buy you a drink." I smiled and typed back, "I might take you up on that." Another message came in, this one from Agent Morrison. "Thought you'd want to know. Hazel's been transferred to a federal prison in Colorado. She's enrolled in a program to help other inmates avoid financial scams." Even in prison, Hazel was running a con of sorts, convincing the authorities that she'd reformed, that she wanted to help people instead of victimizing them. But maybe that wasn't entirely a con. Maybe some part of the woman who'd claimed to love me had been real after all. I deleted the messages and put my phone away, focusing on the sunset and the gentle sound of water lapping against the dock. For the first time in over a year, I felt truly free. Free from the lies, the manipulation, the constant fear that everything I'd built was about to be taken away. Tomorrow, I would start rebuilding my consulting business, this time with proper safeguards to prevent anyone from using it for criminal purposes. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of learning to trust people again, of opening my heart to the possibility of real love instead of elaborate deception. But tonight, I was content to sit by the water and watch the stars come out, knowing that the people who'd tried to destroy my life were finally paying for their crimes. The game was over, and for once, the good guys had won. As the last light faded from the sky, I raised a glass of my father's whiskey in a toast to justice, to truth, and to the strange turns that life can take when you least expect them. The ice clinked against the glass, a sound as clear and honest as the truth I'd finally uncovered about the people I'd trusted. In the distance, a boat's horn echoed across the water, and I smiled, knowing that whatever came next, I would face it with my eyes wide open. The handshake that had started this whole nightmare seemed like a lifetime ago. Pierce Eldrow's territorial squeeze, my response about deleted texts, the moment when 30 guests fell silent and my world began to unravel. But sometimes things have to fall apart before they can be rebuilt stronger than before. I finished my whiskey and headed inside, ready for whatever tomorrow might bring. The truth I'd learned was worth fighting for. And sometimes, if you're lucky and persistent and willing to face the worst about the people you love, the truth will set you free.